Hello, everyone. Welcome to the College Football Playbook podcast. I am Mark Givler, joined for this Monday, April 24th episode with Tyler Shoemaker. Been a little bit. Tyler's been our analytics expert, our gambling expert. He's been running some numbers here. He told me put in a lot of work here the last few weeks on some of your latest numbers. You've got some projections for the 2023 college football season and basically a power index, I guess.
Yep.
We're calling it the TSI, the Tyler Shoemaker Index.
Yep.
That's what we're going with. Okay. So
yeah,
we're going to get
it got so, confusing and just cumbersome to always be like, oh, well, my numbers say, or my model says. So I was like, all right, I'm outsourcing this Twitter. I need your help. We need to come up with a name for this. TSI just kind of rolls off the tongue. So we're going to roll with that.
All right. Well, everyone's going to get their first look at the TSI right here. We're going to go with the top 10 in this episode. But first, I kind of want you to explain to everyone just a general idea of kind of what you put into this and how you arrive at your power rating.
Yeah. So, for anyone that doesn't know, I've been doing power ratings publicly and putting all my information out there since about 2019. I started putting them together in 2017, just kind of privately. And then I started kind of publishing them in 2019, really started posting my betting record and that sort of thing in 2019. So each year I kind of pride myself on making the model more sophisticated, more predictive, and more accurate, obviously. So this year, when the season ended, I was like, okay, I need to figure out a way to incorporate, obviously recruiting rankings is going to be kind of the heart of any projection, especially in terms of the preseason. But also a thing that I think some of the other computer models that are out there may fail to do, at least to the degree that I wanted to, is really capture how teams, that don't recruit at the super elite level, but still put good football teams on the field. I wanted to make sure those programs get credit for their development. So I needed to come up with some kind of formula to be able to account for that, in addition to the recruiting rankings. So the ratings that you're going to see here today will be a reflection of a 4-year weighted recruiting average, giving more preference to third and second year players that generally are the meat of a college football team. Especially when you're talking about the Ohio States and Alabamas of the world. Very rarely do they have 4th year or 5th year guys that are making huge impacts, because usually the best guys leave after 3 years. So I wanted to account for that also. So the ratings you're going to see here today kind of take all of that into account, and a little bit of subjectivity projecting forward for the 2023 season.
Now, when you look at this, I guess, how should we look at this? Because, does strength of schedule play any factor at all, or is this just purely in a vacuum, head-to-head predictor matchups type of a metric?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I do, throughout the season, I will keep track of strength of schedule, but that does not impact the preseason numbers at all.
Gotcha. So just for everyone watching, this is kind of every team gets kind of a clean slate to start the season, and then you can kind of compile from there. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to throw up the top 10 here, and I'll run down the list for anyone who's not watching this on YouTube, who's listening in podcast form. I'll run down the list, and then we'll start to kind of get into some of the discussion here. But here it is. Tyler's for the first TSI index for 2023. We'll start at 10. You've got Washington, 9 Florida State, 8 Tennessee, 7 Penn State, 6 Clemson, 5 USC, 4 Alabama, 3 Michigan, 2 Ohio State, and 1 Georgia. And there seems to be kind of some tiers here. It would appear just like Georgia's kind of tier 1 by itself. They're substantially ahead of the next tier, which is kind of Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama are very tightly bunched there at 2 through 4. And then there's a bit of a drop off there. And then you kind of have USC as kind of the clear cut 5. And then Clemson, Penn State, Tennessee, Florida State, even Washington, there's only a 2-point gap between 6 and 10 there. So that's kind of maybe a tier there as well. were you like, well, let me ask you this. Were you surprised by any of this as you were putting, because this is not, opinion based in the sense that you're not like interjecting really your opinion into these. These are just kind of, you're running numbers and they're spitting out the power rating to you. Yep. So, it's not like you're manipulating this. So anything kind of jump out to you when you did this? Like, oh, that can't be right.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I did. I looked long and hard at the Ohio State, Michigan, even though they're only separated by a half a point, which, is pretty in line with the market. I know we'll talk about some betting lines here in another episode coming up, but I think right now the look ahead line is Michigan -1. So according to my numbers, I'd make Michigan about a 2-point favorite. So I'm right there with the market on that, I think. But I did take a long, hard look at that and really make sure that I had that right in terms of the metrics. And to be honest, with Michigan's rating, like I said, the preseason ratings, there is a touch of subjectivity, only in that I'm still selecting from data. Like, I'm not just pulling things out of a hat, but I do kind of have to decide which data I'm looking at. So for Michigan, I honestly gave them a pretty optimistic number data set that I was pulling from here. So this is a pretty optimistic rating for Michigan. I was a little more conservative with Ohio State just because the uncertainty with the quarterback situation, and is the defense gonna take another step forward here this year? So I was a little more conservative with Ohio State. I was a little more liberal with Michigan's rating, which is why I'm about a point higher than the market on Michigan right now.
So you said you'd have Michigan a 2-point favorite. So is that essentially
I'm sorry. Yeah. A 2-point favorite in the game this year in Ann Arbor. I'm sorry.
You're giving them. So essentially what you're doing is, if I'm understanding this correctly, essentially what you're doing there is you're taking Ohio State as essentially a 1-point favorite on a neutral field and giving Michigan 3 for home field. Is that what's happening there? How does that work for you?
Yeah. So I do have, if you recall, like last year, my ratings do have like a historical home field advantage of how teams have actually performed at home. I think Michigan's is actually a little higher than 3, but the average, and Brian Fremo of FEI, he did this study, and he said that home field on average is about 2.5 points. So just as a general guide, you can use 2.5. I will have more team specific home field advantages on my public sheet that I give out for free every year as we get closer to the season.
So what do you say to a Michigan fan who has watched their team, really get the best of Ohio State the last 2 years in 2 games that were double-digit wins, and now the game's being played at Michigan? Now, obviously, you do factor that in, so I guess that's not really as important as the actual metric in your TSI and your index there. But what do you say to a Michigan fan who's up in arms right now about Ohio State having a higher rating despite not having clarity at the quarterback position and having lost the last 2 games by double digits?
Yeah, I mean, and that would be a fair question to ask, if you're a Michigan fan. But I think at this point, Michigan fans kind of understand that power ratings and matchups, that I mean, that's why they play the games, and it's not on paper. From a power rating standpoint, even after, and we talked about this, I think, on our pre-playoff show this past season. Had Ohio State and Michigan rematched in the national championship, Ohio State would have been favored in that game, despite having just lost at home by 3 touchdowns. So power ratings just work differently than how the matchups sometimes play out on the field. Obviously, they're meant to be predictive, but that's not. It's basically just saying Team A with this profile versus Team B with this profile should result in X. Obviously, there's huge, statistical variation there that's going to happen, standard deviation. So that's just kind of how it plays out sometimes. If I'm a Michigan fan, and I had this exchange with a Michigan fan on Twitter recently, and I was like, the power ratings will probably continue to favor Ohio State. Michigan has gotten the better of Ohio State the last 2 years, and I'm sure Michigan fans will take that. I'm sure they'd rather Ohio State look good on paper, but take the loss on the field, and that's totally understandable.
And you're not on an island. Any power ratings I've seen so far have Ohio State ahead of Michigan, so it's not like yours is special in that regard. It is kind of an industry wide thing right now, which is, I know a sore subject, I think, for Michigan fans, as they, kind of, they feel they're in a better spot right now than Ohio State after the 2 wins. So it'll be interesting in that rivalry as always this year. The one thing I'm curious about here is, you have this top 4, and it's really, like I said, Georgia, that's a pretty significant gap, right? 3.6 points gap there. I guess we'll just start with that. What is it? Obviously, they've recruited tremendously. What skewed it so heavily toward Georgia at number 1?
Yeah, their 4-year weighted recruiting average is second to Alabama. Alabama this year actually has the highest 4-year weighted recruiting score by a pretty wide margin. However, like I said, I wanted to give programs credit for developing, and that doesn't just include the Iowas of the world that develop 3 stars. Georgia's developed 5 stars exceptionally well. They've recruited well, and their power rating relative to that has been outstanding. And honestly, like I mentioned with Ohio State, same thing with Georgia here. I was pretty conservative in the data set that I used in calculating Georgia's rating, because I honestly could have had this thing up closer to like 31. I just didn't feel that was appropriate given the uncertainty at the quarterback position right now.
Yeah, and I don't do an index. I do the gut feel and the watching and trying to analyze, and I leave the data and all the math to you. But Georgia is kind of my heavy number 1 coming into the season as well. I think I said it, and this is how I kind of feel about it. But I think I did say this on our postseason wrap up show after the championship game. My only argument against, I have no good argument against Georgia this upcoming season to not win the national championship. The only angle, if you're forcing me to argue against Georgia this upcoming season, it's that, can they actually three-peat? Are we actually going to see someone three-peat? Because that is freaking hard. Especially now with the, the last, 7-8 years. It is really hard to three-peat. So everyone's coming at them. They do have they will have a new quarterback, which I do think's being maybe downplayed a little bit just because they're so talented everywhere else. But, and the quarterbacks they have are talented. They were highly recruited guys. But, my best argument against Georgia going into the season is that it's just too hard to three-peat. Which is absolutely, I guess, is a good argument, but it's not really. Yeah, it's not a great one. It's a good one in historical terms, but they're gonna have new faces, and it's gonna be a different team. Every year's kind of a different team in one way or another. But that's my only argument against Georgia this year.
I think that's a good point. I think that's one of those things where if you're looking at a season win total or a championship futures bet or something, you maybe don't want to take an over on Georgia or take Georgia to win the national championship. But when you're talking game by game from a power rating, are they going to cover the spread each week? It's maybe, but when you look at the whole body of work, it's they're probably going to slip up somewhere along the line. But when you have to pin it down on a certain game, you just can't do it. And I don't have their schedule in front of me. I know I've looked at it, and I will have a full schedule breakdown with win probabilities later this summer. But it's
not difficult.
Yep.
I'll bring it up here. I don't think I can put it on the screen this quickly, but I can rip it off here. It's Tennessee Martin at home, Ball State at home, South Carolina at home, UAB at home. So their non-league is Tennessee Martin, Ball State, UAB, and then they'll have at Georgia Tech at the end of the season. So that's, a pretty putrid non-league. They get South Carolina at home. They get Kentucky at home. Florida's always a neutral site. They get Ole Miss at home. They do have to go to Tennessee. I don't know if I mentioned this. They do have to go to Auburn. They get Georgia at home, Vanderbilt on the road. That's a That's a great game to have on the road. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not going to be much of a road game. So it's a very, 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 very light schedule, I think. Lighter than they're used to playing, I would think. When this all comes down, we'll see, maybe someone like Kentucky has a bounce back year. But, I mean, a lot of their tough games are either home or neutral.
Yep.
And there's no Oregon on there to start the season or anything like that, like there was this past season for them.
Yeah.
So when you put that together with the talent they have and the confidence that whole program has right now, that's why I said I can't go to the schedule. I can't argue against it from a schedule perspective. I can't argue against it from a talent perspective. I can't argue against it from a coaching perspective. Like, I would just have to tell you that it's really hard to three-peat. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yep. And then one last note on Georgia before we move on. Another factor that did play into, like I said, me being a little more conservative with them, even though they are my clear number one, I was a little more conservative with them. Also, I don't think the loss of Todd Monken has really been discussed as the offensive coordinator, but I thought he did a great job. I thought a lot of the Ohio State writers going into the Peach Bowl covered what he did for Georgia extremely well and kind of gave me an appreciation for just how well he coordinated that offense last year with Stetson Bennett. So that I think that loss, can't really be understated at this point. So we'll see. I think Mike Bobo is the new offensive coordinator. So we'll see how that goes. See if it's a smooth transition. But that is just another kind of question mark, not concern, but question mark as we head into the season.
Yeah, good point. The coordinator thing is key, and you're marrying that to a new quarterback. So that's going to be their on the field potential downfall. But boy, do they look good on paper. We got that next year. I got the rankings up here again. That next year at 2, 3, and 4, Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, separated by exactly from Ohio State down to 4, from Ohio State at 2 down to Alabama at 4. You just have a 0.6 points. So basically half a point of separation between Ohio State at 2, then Michigan 3, and Alabama 4. I guess I'm a little curious. I'm almost more curious. Not that we're picking nits here at this point because they are so close, but Alabama's recruiting track record should be pretty good. You mentioned they were the top in that metric for you. Their development record should be pretty good. NFL's littered with Alabama guys. So what has them kind of losing the little coin flip here between Michigan and Ohio State and Bama, and kind of having them 4th versus having them maybe 2nd?
Yeah, I think, and again, this is why I like to do ratings and talk about ratings versus rankings necessarily, because you could look at this and be like, wow, Ohio State's 2 and Alabama's 4. Like, that's crazy. But I mean, we're talking 0.6 of a point difference here, and 0.1 between Michigan and Alabama at 3 and 4. I think what the hair splitting came down to here, Michigan's development rating is 2, Alabama's is 4. So I mean, they're both great. Michigan's is just a little bit better, and I like what Michigan has established. Like what we know about them coming back, I think was the differentiator here.
Gotcha. Yep. And this is a fascinating thing, and we're going to have a show about this here soon. I'm going to have some guys on to talk about this. It's going to be, I think, a really interesting show. This you've got this, consensus top group here. And quite frankly, I think this is basically everyone's top 4 in some order. Whether it's you ask like an analyst opinion or a power rating, anyone who does power ratings, these are kind of the 4 right now. And 3 of these teams are breaking in new quarterbacks.
Yeah,
which I think is going to lead to a really interesting season when you're talking about all the top programs that everyone thinks are top 5 teams coming into the season, but they're all replacing their starting quarterbacks, record-setting quarterbacks in many cases. These are not guys who are going to be easily replaceable, and they're not replacing anyone, and none of these guys are being replaced by anyone with experience. I think all the returning guys who are in the mix to start at Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State have, I don't think any of them have over 70 career pass attempts. to this point. So how did that, if at all, factor into what you were doing with your ratings?
So it didn't necessarily factor in a whole lot to the process, but once the process was complete and I had the, kind of my first draft of ratings, and I took a step back and I was like, does this make sense that they're all, so close? And like I said, Georgia's rating could have been 3 points higher. But so that's where that kind of impacted their score. But I thought they were the clear number one based on everything else. And Ohio State's, even looking back at like 2021 when Ohio State was breaking in CJ Stroud, who also had no experience, like their development rating, like their power rating correlation compared to their recruiting rating was excellent. So like they've got a documented history of being able to do this. And kind of looking back at the same thing, 2021 Alabama, theirs was even actually better than Ohio State's in Bryce Young's first year as a starter with relatively no experience coming into that year. So teams with a track record of doing it, I do think kind of get the benefit of the doubt, but that's also why I do kind of look at the historics of it and not just like, oh, well, what do I think about, I'm not a quarterback evaluator. I don't know, if Kyle McCord or whoever is going to be a great quarterback, but I can look at what that team, what that program, and that specifically when they have, continuity at the head coach or offensive coordinator, what they've been able to do. And that gives me a pretty good baseline to be able to come up with these projections.
Yeah. I'll tell you who I'm a little surprised isn't on here that I would have, and I don't want to ruin we're going to do another episode, I think, where we talk 11 through 25. I don't want to totally ruin that episode, but I'm a little surprised LSU isn't on here. Maybe you don't have to say exactly where they are, but were they close to making this?
They're not close to the top 10 necessarily. I've got them at 15. So I'll spoiler alert. I've got LSU at 15. But again, I mean, we're talking from 15.
The gaps probably get smaller.
Yeah,
and smaller
from 15 up to 11 is only 2.2 points. So I mean, they're kind of in a cluster with some other teams. I thought you were going to say someone else because 11 and 12 are within a half a point of being in the top 10. So, I mean, everything's very clustered together, which, at a glance is really exciting as we think about what the 2023 season could be, because I did feel like there was quite a bit of parity and uncertainty, even going into championship weekend last year, where like, is Ohio State going to get in? Is USC going to get in? I think we could be looking at a similar situation this coming year based on what I'm seeing on paper here, as we sit here in April.
Yeah, I think it's, especially after Georgia, like if you told me right now, like, okay, Georgia's going to be one of the four, and you just take kind of them out of the equation, and you tell me, pick the next three. I mean, I would do it. I would have an opinion on it, but I don't know that I would feel great about it.
Yeah.
Most years I would feel pretty good about at least three of my four picks. I don't think there's a lock after. I think Georgia's a lock. I really do. I think unless they get just brutalized by an injury rush and then down to their third quarterback or something, it's hard to see Georgia with their talent and schedule not like at least getting to the SEC championship game and doing so with possibly being undefeated, or maybe they would drop a close one at Tennessee. I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to envision Georgia not making it. But after that, like, do I think Ohio State could get in? Sure. Do I think Alabama could, come back this year like gangbusters under, Saban's angry and program's angry and have a great, season and beat Georgia in the SEC? Like, yeah, they could do all that. They could also lose 3 games.
Yep.
Bama's got a pretty tough schedule, and so, I don't know. I don't know what really happens behind Georgia this year, but it's going to be fun.
And that I'm kind of on alert for like one of these top 10 teams, definitely, but maybe even one of these like top 5 or 6 teams losing like 2 or 3 games this year. Like, I really could see it. I mean, some of these teams, obviously not Georgia, but behind Georgia, I mean, some of these teams have some pretty difficult spots on their schedule, and and the power ratings are just so clustered. Like these are going to be coin flip games, a lot more often than I think we've really seen them kind of in recent years.
Yeah, I think like when you talk about like over under season win totals and kind of how I look at those, and I don't know what they are for these teams. I haven't looked yet for this upcoming season, but I would say most years, like without like let's say like Alabama and Ohio State, if you give me a range of like what their record could be, it's generally pretty narrow. It's generally 12-0 or 11-1 or 11-1 or 10-2. Like it's very, very narrow. I think this year 12-0 down to 9-3 is on the table, and that's with like good health. Like, that's without anything stupid happening. I think the same thing with Michigan. I think the same thing with USC, even though their schedule is probably not quite as difficult. They don't play defense.
Yeah,
they got to show me
their defense. Their defense is a problem, and I will say, just in looking at my overall ratings, like if we're doing like a stock watch, like I'm buying some stock in the top of the Pac-12 because the Pac-12 has a few teams here that are pretty highly rated that are all going to play each other, and it's going to be really interesting for how that kind of shakes out.
Yeah. In the school, I think, I mentioned one that I was a little surprised wasn't there. I'm actually not surprised Florida State's on there. I think maybe some people will be. I'm not. I think just the way they kind of finished last year, what they've got coming back, they seem to have turned the corner to me. But I don't. I'm gonna stick my foot in my mouth here probably, but is Tennessee for real? I think they were last, but like, was that just lightning in a bottle with your 25-year-old quarterback? And, you lose some guys to the NFL now. Are they a program that has they're not a program that has proven it can reload
right
in recent years. So that felt a little aggressive to me, but
Tennessee was probably the hardest of the top 10 teams to really get a handle on, I think, because their 2021 power rating to recruiting rating correlation versus their 2022 correlation was just so different that like I really had to, some of these are really like Georgia's was like the exact same 2021 and 2022. So like theirs was pretty straightforward, but Tennessee's was so stark from 2021 to 2022. I did give them some benefit of the doubt. Their rating could have been 3 points higher, but I also probably could have, used their 2021 data, more heavily and made it 3 points lower. So I felt like this was a good middle ground between the two, but they were very difficult. So if they come out and I end up downgrading them 3 or 4 points over the course of the season, I won't be surprised. But if they come out and Joe Milton lights the world on fire and they don't miss a beat, like I also wouldn't be terribly caught off guard by that. So 17.5 rating for them was kind of the middle ground of where they could have been, given how they've recruited and developed over the last couple of years.
And then just, Washington in there at 10, I think, boy, they should be really good on offense, right? I mean, Penix is back. They got some great receivers. I think some really underrated receivers. I think some guys who are going to play on Sundays that maybe a lot of the country isn't quite familiar with, but probably will be more this year. What went in, I guess, where were they strong for you, or was there a certain metric that kind of pushed them?
Yeah, so their recruiting doesn't blow you out of the water. They're 29th in their 4-year weighted recruiting rating for me, but they were just so good. Like their power rating was so good last year under first year head coach Kalen DeBoer relative to their 4-year weighted average from last year. Like that carried a lot of weight with me, that I'm going to give Kalen DeBoer the benefit of the doubt. Now, I didn't project the same size jump from, that they had from 21 to 22. I didn't project that same size from 22 to 23, but it's somewhere in the, it is higher than what it was last year. I am giving him the benefit of the doubt that in year 2, they're going to be even better than they were last year. Especially when you factor in that Michael Penix is back. I think that's huge for them. So it was kind of the combination of coach and quarterback both back. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt there.
Well, I'm interested to see 11 to 25, especially after kind of you saying how close it was there for maybe the first 5 that weren't in the top 10. So we'll make sure we get that up here soon. We'll talk 11 through 25 in the preseason TSI power ratings. And we will have some other stuff we're going to be looking forward to. We're going to be breaking down some early season gambling lines and seeing if there's maybe some value on certain games. It's one thing, we'll talk about this on the episode, but it's a blessing and a curse with like the new online gambling on this type of stuff, because it's so easy now and it's fun and it's everything. But like, I don't want to give them my $10 or $20 futures bet and then have to wait, here, hold my money for 8 months or whatever and do that. So, but we'll get into some early lines, early game lines, early, maybe some national championship odds and things like that. And we'll do that as well. So, appreciate everyone watching and listening to this episode. Like I said, we'll have a new one here going through 11 through 25 shortly, and some other good content coming on the channel. So if you're not subscribed already, please do. And if you listen to podcasts, you don't always get a chance to watch on YouTube, you can get us on the any podcast platform that you use. Will be on there for its College Football Playbook podcast. So you can download there on iTunes and Spotify and everything else. So appreciate everyone listening, watching, and we will catch you later.